Tonight, from huge victory to stunning downfall, Barry O'Farrell to resign as New South Wales Premier.
I still can't explain either the arrival of a gift that I have no recollection of or its absence.
New South Wales is an incredibly different position under his leadership. We've basically gone from a laughingstock of the nation to leading on many indicators.
Also tonight, 2 men dead in a Hunter Valley coal mine collapse. They're here. Sydney turns out to meet the Royals. And the NRL's new hardline approach to lifting tackles. Good evening, Jeremy Fernandez with a special 1-hour edition of ABC News, also coming to you nationally on ABC News 24. It's been an extraordinary day in New South Wales politics. The man seen as the antidote for 16 years of Labor rule has been brought down over an expensive bottle of wine and a thank you note. Barry O'Farrell today announced he will step down as Premier after giving misleading evidence to a corruption inquiry. A new leader will be elected in a party room meeting next week. We'll have extensive coverage and analysis tonight from state political reporter Brigid Glanville, as well as 7:30 New South Wales presenter Quentin Dempster. First, let's go to Brigid at State Parliament. Brigid, Barry O'Farrell's resignation today is nothing short of stunning.
Absolutely, Jeremy. It surprised both his closest allies and his enemies. Today, the Premier was supposed to be making a major infrastructure announcement with the Prime Minister in Western Sydney, and then he was supposed to be enjoying the afternoon with the Royals. But instead, very early this morning, he was forced to resign because what was about to be revealed is that he did receive a bottle of wine and he didn't declare it. Now, he's the one leading up to the last state election that set standards for his ministry very high. He campaigned that his government would not have any scandals like the previous Labor government. So this has meant that today, Barry O'Farrell has had to meet those very high standards and resign.
Morning.
It took less than a day to end a 20-year career.
As soon as I can organise a meeting of the Parliamentary Liberal Party for next week, I will be resigning the position and enabling a new Liberal leader to be elected, someone who will then become the Premier of New South Wales.
Forced out over a bottle of wine.
I've accepted that I've had a massive memory fail. I still can't explain either the arrival of a gift that I have no recollection of or its absence, which I certainly still can't fathom.
The $3,000 bottle of Grange has been at the centre of corruption hearings for the past 2 days. The ICAC heard that Australian Water Holdings CEO Nick DiGirolamo sent the wine to the new Premier in 2011. Barry O'Farrell's denials were emphatic.
Let me be clear, I didn't receive a bottle of 1959 Grange. There was no 1959 bottle of Grange received by me.
But today the Commission heard the bottle was taken right to his doorstep and the Premier sent a handwritten thank you note to Mr DiGirolamo and his wife. Dear Nick and Jodie, we wanted to thank you for your kind note and the wonderful wine. 1959 was a good year, even if it is getting even further away. Thanks for all your support. Kind regards, Baz and Rosemary. Faced with indisputable evidence, the Premier had few options.
In no way did I seek to mislead, willfully or otherwise, the Independent Commission Against Corruption. That would go against everything that I have.
A sentiment he repeated when he reappeared at the ICAC to account for his memory lapse. It's clearly my handwriting. It's done nothing to jog my memory. The Premier's allies were quick to praise him.
Barry is a man of honour. He is a man of integrity. He is a very decent man, and I think he's been a very capable Premier over the last 3 years.
I think that what we've seen is New South Wales is an incredibly different position under his leadership. We've basically gone from a laughingstock of the nation on many indicators to leading on many indicators.
The opposition leader was quick to deflect suggestions that Labor's woes had spread to the Liberals.
Is there an element, though, that Barry O'Farrell has taken the fall for something that many of the people in the previous Labor government wouldn't have gone down for?
Let's be very clear, this isn't about a bottle of wine. This is an insight into how the Liberal Party operates in government in New South Wales.
It talks about influence peddling, and it talks about the corrupting influence of lobbying. It talks about people in New South Wales being shut out of decisions while the big end of town has unfettered access to our politicians.
Barry O'Farrell's nemesis, the Shooters Party, which holds the balance of power in the state, says they are vindicated.
Always said he was untrustworthy, and his decision to resign today just confirms that in our mind.
The ICAC said there will be no corruption findings against Mr O'Farrell.
Well, today's resignation marks a dramatic fall from grace. Barry O'Farrell swept to power in 2011 with the biggest electoral margin in New South Wales history. Philippa McDonald takes a look at a political career spanning more than 2 decades.
Barry O'Farrell made the leap from backroom power broker to elected official in the mid-90s. By 2007, he was leader of the opposition.
My team have signed a public contract with people across this state to deliver on our promises. A contract that details our key commitments and provides you with an assurance that will be held to account.
In 2011, Barry O'Farrell was elected the 43rd Premier of New South Wales.
And I want to thank all the people of this state for putting their trust in the New South Wales Liberals and Nationals. And I promise we won't let you down.
He was in the right place when the music stopped and he became Premier.
His early days as Premier saw Barry O'Farrell suspend his communications director Peter Grimshaw over allegations of a vendetta against the Star Casino. At the time, the Premier declared his life was an open book.
Hasn't been cited since he was elected.
A 45-seat majority gave Barry O'Farrell a powerful mandate. He gave the green light to James Packer's casino at Barangaroo. He's been praised for investing in infrastructure, and he privatised Sydney's ferries.
I'm devastated for him personally. I'm also devastated for the state because I actually think Barry was doing a really good job as Premier.
In the past year, he lost 3 ministers, 2 of them in questionable circumstances. Finance Minister Greg Pearce was sacked over a perceived conflict of interest.
The Ministerial Code of Conduct is very clear. I've repeatedly said I expect the highest standards from my government, and where breaches occur, where codes are broken, there will be consequences.
In December, the ICAC raided the offices of Energy Minister and Member for Terrigal Chris Harcher.
We have seen 3 senior ministers from the front bench go in just 4 months.
He set a high bar for himself, his colleagues, he's stuck by it and he's fallen on his sword today.
A departure that took everyone by surprise. Philippa McDonald, ABC News.
Let's return now to Brigid Glanville at State Parliament. She's joined by the Planning Minister and staunch Barry O'Farrell supporter, Brad Hazzard.
Minister, thanks for joining us. Now, you were with the Premier today. You're one of his senior ministers, the Planning Minister. You're also a very good friend of his. You were with him at the ICAC. How is he?
Look, it's been a tough day. It's been a tough day for New South Wales. It's been a tough day for the Premier. But he set very high standards and he is a very strong leader. He made decisions about his own future and he's made the decision.
He consults a lot with you. Did he ask you if you thought he should resign?
He consults with a lot of people, but certainly I offered my view, and that my view was that he should not resign. Look, Barry O'Farrell has turned this state around. He's taken us to a position where we had very low job growth. We've now got the highest job growth in the country. Infrastructure was just atrocious under the former government. We've got massive infrastructure, North-West Rail, South-West Rail, North Connects, West Connects, new hospitals being built. He's been doing a lot for the state. The economy's turned around. We are leading all states. It is therefore extremely sad that in a situation where others, like for example Eddie Obeid and $100 million deals on coal mines, that because of a lapse of memory, Premier O'Farrell has seen fit to resign.
But he himself set those standards high. You said don't resign. Why did you tell him not to resign?
Look, anybody who's moved into government, I suppose there's not that many, but I remember those first 3 weeks of government, and this happened just 3 weeks after. He forgot a bottle of wine being delivered to him 3 weeks after he came into government. The first week, he ran the state entirely, just himself and the Deputy Premier. When he appointed ministers on the 3rd of April 2011, they commenced work on the 4th. On the 7th of April, his father-in-law died, had been suffering from melanoma and died. It was a most traumatic, personal and difficult time transitioning into government. Literally, a week and a half later, apparently a bottle of wine was delivered. He forgot about it. He did his best. He told truthfully to ICAC what he thought, and of course wasn't shown this other document to prompt his memory until this morning.
We're hearing there could be a shake-up. Is your job secure?
Oh, look, at this stage, any jobs of ministers are all, that's a matter for the new leader. But can I say, we have an absolute plethora. We have many people in the Liberal Party. We have a wonderful pool of talent. It's sad that Barry O'Farrell has gone, very sad. I think for New South Wales it's sad. But there's still many people lined up and available for that job, and who will do a very good job for the people of New South Wales.
I think you said you've been with the Premier till 3 o'clock this afternoon. Who's going to be the next Premier? I know you're doing the numbers.
I'm certainly not doing the numbers. No, I can guarantee you that. I'm still in a state of shock over what's happened to the Premier, and I think the people of New South Wales would be wondering what's happened. Look, those issues will unfold. The Premier has indicated there will be a party room meeting, probably next week. And in the fullness of time, the Liberal Party, sensibly, carefully, moderately, will select a new leader who will do the great work, continue the great work that Barry O'Farrell has put in place for New South Wales.
Brad Hazzard, thanks for joining us. Jeremy, back to you.
So as that shock continues to reverberate, the question is being asked, who is next in line for the state's top job? The Treasurer Mike Baird and Transport Minister Gladys Berejiklian appear to be the leading candidates, as Premier Barry O'Farrell favoured Ms Berejiklian, but that could work against her when Liberal Party MPs gather next week to choose their new leader. Rebecca Barrett has this report.
Gladys Berejiklian has always been touted as Barry O'Farrell's favoured successor. She was his strong right hand during the March 2011 election. In victory, he singled her out for praise.
You've done a great job through this campaign. You've been a great Shadow Minister for Transport. You'll be a great Minister for Transport.
She's been a strong performer as a minister and praised as a hard worker. Before entering Parliament, she was a Commonwealth Bank executive. The other obvious contender also has a strong finance sector background. Mike Baird has long been viewed as a future state Liberal leader. He was promoted to the Shadow Ministry in 2008, prompting speculation then about his ambitions.
He's looking over his shoulder and he's using this reshuffle to try and contain his leadership rival.
I have aspirations to be part of the Barry O'Farrell team, and that's what I'm going to do.
But the Premier had other ideas. Soon after winning office in 2011, he stripped the new Treasurer of half of his powers. Mike Baird was also demoted to number 11 on the Cabinet list. He's now one of the favourites to replace Barry O'Farrell, but Mike Baird is yet to show his hand.
Will you throw your hat in the ring for Premier?
Listen, that's not a question for today.
The social media campaign has started, but on the streets, opinion is divided.
I'd say Mike Baird will get it.
I think Gladys has proven her mettle on the floor. Female power.
Yeah.
Woo! Feminism. Feminism.
Just want to see what happens best for New South Wales, I guess.
It's now up to the party to decide. A vote will be held next week. Rebecca Barrett, ABC News.
For more on just who the next New South Wales Premier might be, let's bring Brigid, Glanville and Quentin Dempster back into the discussion. Brigid first, in the public's mind, as we've just seen, Mike Baird and Gladys Berejiklian are the front runners, so are there any other real contenders?
Look, I'm certainly hearing today, talking to various people, that they are the front runners. But there could be some other people as well, and that's because I heard today that the Premier's Chief of Staff had a meeting with the Minister's Chief of Staff and told them that all of their jobs could be on the line, that there could be a major reshuffle within this government to bring in, there were lots of new backbenchers that have come in at the last election, and to bring in a sort of generational change. And if that's the case, it could be someone led by like Mike Baird or Gladys Berejiklian. I'm hearing that Anthony Roberts, who's from the right, may very well become deputy leader, and that would make sense if it's someone like Gladys, who's from the left. But I've also heard that contenders could be the new Finance Minister, Andrew Constance, and I also wouldn't rule out Family and Community Services Minister, Prue Goward. But the last I'd sort of heard is that Gladys Berejiklian was looking like the front runner, but I'm sure they're all going to be very busy on the phones tonight.
Now, Quentin, as Brigid just mentioned, there's a few names there. Anyone who replaces Barry O'Farrell will certainly need to be seen as a clean skin, no pun intended. Do those candidates fit the bill?
They will all have to go through a process of examining themselves, Jeremy, whether they've received money from Nick DiGirolamo, Australian Water Holdings, what's the status of their pecuniary interest register. We can't go through this again. It will be all the media, everybody else in the Parliament will be looking at the standing and probity of the person who's to be the next Premier of New South Wales. This is what it's become now. Particularly as the ICAC's inquiry has gone into the influence of vested interests through lobbyists into the Liberal Party itself. And this debate goes on about the division and the potential for compromise of government ministers because they're also politicians. They've also got to raise money to get into Parliament and to help their parties get into Parliament. This has got a long way to go, not only in the selection of the Premier of New South Wales, but also the governance of New South Wales.
All right, Quentin Dempster and Brigid Glanville, we'll leave it there for now. Thank you. Coming up later in the bulletin, 7:30, Sarah Ferguson speaks with the former New South Wales Liberal Premier Nick Greiner, and Quentin Dempster takes a look at the history between the ICAC and the state's leaders. You're watching a special one-hour edition of ABC News. Tonight's top story, the New South Wales Premier Barry O'Farrell falls on his sword. The Liberal leader's long political career cut short over an expensive bottle of wine and a thank you note. Yesterday, at a corruption inquiry, the Premier emphatically denied all knowledge of a gifted bottle of Grange. Today, with the undeniable evidence of a signed thank you card in his own handwriting, Barry O'Farrell announced he'd resigned. A new Premier will be appointed next week. ABC reporter Adam Harvey has been tracking the course of Barry O'Farrell's rise and spectacular fall.
After 16 years in opposition, Barry O'Farrell marched to power in 2011. His landslide victory was built on public abhorrence over a culture of secret deals and special favours in the Labor Party.
The Liberal Party was formed to represent all people, not sectional interest. We won't let you down.
That promise now seems empty. Barry O'Farrell has been toppled by an inquiry into secret deals and special favours that has inflicted enormous damage on his own party.
I will be resigning the position and enabling a new Liberal leader to be elected, someone who will then become the Premier of New South Wales.
My reaction is it's a staggering and historic moment, and these are the sorts of things, I suppose, that make politics interesting when you get something momentous.
Hopefully it's a day in which all political parties learn that this culture, the culture of lobbying, the culture of influence peddling, cannot continue.
At first, it looked as if the Premier and his ministers needn't lose any sleep over this ICAC investigation, which centred on an obscure water and pipes company, Australian Water Holdings.
Commissioner, we've looked carefully at the activities of Mr O'Farrell and Mr Pearce, and we have found no evidence to implicate either in any corruption.
The initial focus was on the other side of politics and allegations of a secret $3 million investment by the family of corrupt ALP power broker Eddie O'Bee.
We've never owned shares in ALP. We don't own them, we've never owned them.
But the investigation crossed political lines, thanks mainly to the man at the helm of Australian Water Holdings, Liberal Party donor Nick DiGirolamo.
It might even be said, readapting Shakespeare, that corruption acquaints a man with strange bedfellows.
DiGirolamo hired Arthur Sinodinos to the company's board. Earlier this month, ICAC claimed the scalp of the now federal Senator Sinodinos over his role as chairman of Australian Water Holdings.
Whilst this process is underway, I will therefore be standing aside as Assistant Treasurer.
But the pain for the Liberal Party had just begun. On what was to be the second last day of this inquiry, Premier Barry O'Farrell was called in to answer questions about his relationship with Nick DiGirolamo. And about a very expensive gift Mr DiGirolamo claimed to have sent the Premier just 1 month after he won power. The Premier denied receiving it.
I want to categorically refute the claims about the 1959 bottle of Penfold Grange. Let me be clear, I didn't receive a bottle of 1959 Grange. I may not know a lot about wine, but I know that I would remember if I had received a vintage of that type. And of course, if I had received a 1959 Grange, I would have declared it, both on my parliamentary declaration, but also my ministerial declaration.
We have a very good idea.
But in an extraordinary 24 hours, ICAC laid out the evidence. Australian Water Holdings accounts showing a gift to Barry O'Farrell worth almost $3,000. A courier's invoice recording a delivery to Mr O'Farrell's northern Sydney suburb. And an apparent thank you call. Mr O'Farrell's phone records showed a 30-second call made at around the time the wine would have been delivered to Nick DiGirolamo. The Premier denied any knowledge of the call or the wine.
It talks volumes about New South Wales politics, that he can't remember a $3,000 bottle of wine. It says that this is politics where the giving of gifts, where the giving of influence, where the passage of decisions is so caught up in the network of mates and the network of party influence that nobody can tell which way is up and which way is down.
At 9:15 a.m. today, a bombshell. ICAC produced this thank you note from the Premier and his wife to Nick DiGirolamo.
Dear Nick and Jodie, we wanted to thank you for your kind note and the wonderful wine. 1959 was a good year, even if it is getting even further away. Thanks for all your support.
And the Premier's fate was sealed.
I've accepted that I've had a massive memory fail. I still can't explain either the arrival of a gift that I have no recollection of or its absence, which I certainly still can't fathom.
He had no choice given the categorical answers he'd given the Commission yesterday. I mean, he was very, very direct in his answers to ICAC, and therefore I guess that directness, that decisiveness yesterday was reflected by decisive action today, and it cost him the premiership.
The Premier's official reason for going is because he misled ICAC. The reality is much richer than that. The reality goes to a Premier who comes to office who's inundated with gifts, with lobbying, with influence. He can't tell one from the other.
The most likely replacement for Mr O'Farrell is the state's Treasurer, Mike Baird. But 7:30 can reveal that Mr Baird, too, has a link to Nick DiGirolamo. In March 2012, DiGirolamo was considered for a position on the board of Sydney Ports Corporation. This confidential briefing note shows he was ranked 6th on a list of possible candidates because he didn't have the right experience or skills. He was only deemed suitable for smaller boards. But just 3 months later, the government appointed Mr DiGirolamo to the board of the State Water Corporation, which runs New South Wales' network of dams that supply rural industry. Treasurer Mike Baird signed off on the appointment.
There was no reason to appoint Mr DiGirolamo. He was a major campaign donor to the Liberal Party. He was a major influence peddler within the Liberal Party. It is very hard to understand how Mr Baird did not at that point say, hey, wait a minute, this doesn't stack up.
The Treasurer's office says Mr DiGirolamo was appointed on merit following the advice of an independent panel. But the Liberal Party's problems are far from over. ICAC will air more dirty linen in a new inquiry beginning later this month, which will investigate whether Liberal MPs corruptly solicited donations from developers. Barry O'Farrell will formally resign next week. The man who came to power promising integrity and an end to shady deals and inside influence will leave office tainted by an expensive gift from a dubious lobbyist.
Adam Harvey with that report. Barry O'Farrell's resignation came after a denial under oath before the ICAC. It was that denial which dug him into an evidentiary hole from which there was no escape. But he's not the only sitting Premier to have appeared before the ICAC, and he's not the first to resign after doing so. Quentin Dempster takes a look at New South Wales Premiers and the ICAC.
The ICAC was established in 1988 by the incoming Nick Greiner government after years of folklore about deep-seated corruption within the New South Wales Labor Party. But instead of trawling through past scandals, the ICAC under Ian Temby QC looked at contemporary corruption, land deals in northern New South Wales, the sale of confidential government information. In 1992, it consumed its creator when it found Greiner to have acted corruptly in appointing a dissident Liberal, Terry Metherell, to a government job to create a politically advantageous bear pit vacancy. While the Court of Appeal struck down the ICAC finding, Greiner, in minority government at the time, had to resign the premiership when he could not get support from crossbench independents. Other premiers have been called to assist the ICAC in its various inquiries over the years. John Fahey was called in 1995 to answer questions about a pension payment for a backbencher. And 9 years later, Bob Carr answered questions after the so-called Orange Grove affair, a dispute between Westfield's Frank Lowy and bulky goods entrepreneur Nabil Ghazal. Carr was exonerated. Former Premiers Maurice Yemmer, Nathan Rees and Christina Keneally all appeared after they'd left office during the Obeid Corporation investigation last year to give contextual evidence about party factionalism and cabinet decision-making. Barry O'Farrell's sudden departure came as a shock. He's now the second sitting Premier to resign following an ICAC inquiry. As a result, the power of the corruption watchdog after 26 years is now in sharp focus.
Quentin Dempster there, and as Quentin explained, the ICAC ultimately led to Nick Greiner's own downfall as Premier. He says he can sympathise with Barry O'Farrell. 7:30's Sarah Ferguson spoke with a former Liberal leader a short time ago.
Nick Greiner, welcome to 7:30.
Thanks, Sarah.
Did Barry O'Farrell have to resign?
Oh yes, I think his political judgment then has been very good. I think this is about politics, about political view. It's not about ICAC, it's clearly not about corruption. I think his judgment that his position was untenable, having given misleading or whatever evidence yesterday and having found within 12 hours that it was misleading, I think his judgment that it was untenable for him to go on is probably correct.
If he'd been less emphatic yesterday, do you think he could have survived?
Oh, look, you always, people said to me 25, 22 years ago, you shouldn't have resigned, you should have hung on. I think you make your own judgments. Yes, in retrospect, if you hadn't have done the press conference and said umpteen times that he hadn't got the bottle of wine. But I don't think that's the way Barry would see it. I think it's quite clear he lied, if you like, under oath, not deliberately, of course, and he then went on the media and told the whole world that this was the case. It turned out not to be the case. Very hard to have the integrity and credibility as a head of government once you've done that, and I guess that's his political judgment.
You call it a lie. Do you think that he is possibly vulnerable to a perjury charge then?
I would think the odds are zero.
Why would an honest politician, though, just to come back to the matter at the heart of this, why would an honest politician accept a $3,000 bottle of wine from someone he knows is lobbying his government for a lucrative, controversial contract?
Well, at that time the government was only just forming up. I have no idea of the facts and I'm not going to provide commentary about it. I accept his recollection of the events. The normal thing would have been to send it somewhere and to put it on a register, but I don't think one should ascribe any great thought or motivation to this. This was a period a week after an election.
Doesn't really pass the smell test, though, does it? He did know that Nicky Di Girolamo and his company were lobbying for a lucrative contract. Would you have accepted a bottle of wine under those circumstances?
Yes.
You would?
Of course.
And he would put on the register, and if he'd had an organised office, he would have. Look, I think the media and the community can get its knickers in a knot quite unnecessarily about that sort of thing. I mean, this is about a political judgment, about a failure of memory. There is no scintilla of suggestion that Barry's corrupt. There's no scintilla of suggestion that he's other than very honest. In fact, in my personal dealings with him, I'd say he was honest to a fault and even beyond a fault.
Why is it all right for an elected official to accept a $3,000 gift from someone who wants something from him? I don't think that would pass the smell test for anybody in this community.
You just put it on the register. I don't agree with that. You just put it on the register and it ought to be open, but in the business of sending gifts backwards and forwards, Sarah, I don't think in practice that works. I don't think one ought to push the attack, lobbying is terrible. Lobbying is an integral part of democracy.
Let me come back to stop that. I want to come back to lobbying in just a moment, but just to stay with AWH, you profess not to know much about it, but it was your government that created the company that became AWH. Did you follow what AWH was doing later on when Nicky Di Girolamo was milking, according to ICAC, milking the state government and the taxpayers for large sums of money?
I've read about it, yes.
You weren't aware of it at the time?
In 1988?
No, when it was happening. You were obviously involved with the Rouse Hill infrastructure when it was set up. You knew about it. It was Nicky Di Girolamo who exploited the contract that your government had created. Did you not follow it later?
Oh, look, I think that's... I think your research needs a vast amount of more research. I think it's a nonsense to suggest that the contract in 1988 had anything to do with the behaviour of AWH.
My question is simply, were you aware of it? Were you following it?
Of course not.
And yet I did see...
it really is, if I might say so, it's a complete nonsense question. The proposition behind it is nonsense. Don't know where you get it from.
I'm actually getting it from the ICAC itself. I think there were some questions raised by the council assisting ICAC to Arthur Sinodinos. He said that Arthur Sinodinos and Nicky Di Girolamo had come to see you, and the suggestion was that was to smooth the path to Barry O'Farrell. So you were aware of it to that extent?
They came to see me and said they were trying to lobby the government. I told them, and I'm still my position, that private infrastructure is an entirely good part. You can see it happening at Badgerys Creek and everywhere. It's an entirely appropriate and necessary part of getting the most effective infrastructure provision in New South Wales or anywhere else.
But did you do, forgive me for interrupting, but did you do anything to help them in their lobbying efforts, to help them get in contact with O'Farrell?
Of course not.
Nothing at all?
No.
But isn't this exactly the problem with the system that we have at the moment, that while that's not corrupt, the meeting with Arthur Sinodinos, yourself and Nicky Di Girolamo, it's the sort of backdoor influence peddling that, while not corrupt, is something that makes people very uncomfortable because it's not transparent?
Well, I do think that there's been great improvements in the 25 years since I was involved. In my view, what you need is good rules about disclosure, about transparency, and I think it's moved a long way in that direction. After that, you actually have to rely on the behaviour of the players.
There are members of your former government who believe that the system should be far more tightly regulated, that just regulating third-party lobbyists isn't enough. What the public actually should be able to know is who's going in and out of those offices, because as it stands, Arthur Sinodinos, Nicky Di Girolamo can go in and out and there's no regulation of that.
Yeah, I don't have a problem if you want to put ministers' diaries, I think it happens in other countries, to public exposure. I don't think there's a problem with that, but my point is that the notion, which is popular with the media, that you can regulate... Not
just with the media, these are ideas that are coming from, for example, the former Treasurer of New South Wales.
The notion that you can regulate and legislate things to death is clearly not correct. It makes people feel good. It won't, in fact, resolve what are problems of human behaviour, human greed and things like that.
But isn't that system,
what we should look at,
that system, the system you're talking about...
No, Sarah, let me finish.
I will.
The ICAC is doing, and I'm of course a great fan of ICAC, which I created, it is about public exposure and things like that, which is a method of trying to change the culture.
Let me bring you to the current situation now in the New South Wales government. How important is it for the next Premier to be able to distance himself from the events at ICAC?
oh, look, there's 2 or 3 candidates and they're all excellent and I'm not going to endorse any of them. I don't think this government, in terms of the way it's behaved as a government, has any integrity issue whatsoever. I think its record in terms of integrity is very, very good.
Let me just ask you this about Mike Baird, who's one of the front runners. Now, he was approved for a board position on the state corporation. Mike Baird approved a position on a state corporation for Nick DiGirolamo, despite the fact that Mr DiGirolamo had been rejected for another board position only 3 months earlier on the grounds that his legal skill set was too narrow. Should Mike Baird therefore be ruled out as the next Premier?
I know nothing about it, but I think Mike Baird is doing a superb job, and the reason the New South Wales economy is the economy of choice in Australia now, which it hasn't been for a very long time, is largely down to him, but I have no knowledge of what you're talking about.
All right, thank you very much indeed for coming in to talk to us.
Nice to see you.
The former New South Wales Premier Nick Greiner there speaking with 7:30's Sarah Ferguson. Joining me once again is state political reporter Brigid Glanville and the presenter of 7:30 New South Wales, Quentin Dempster. Brigid, first to you. You've been hitting the phone since we last spoke with you about 45 minutes ago. What are you now hearing about the candidates for the premiership?
Well, I must admit, every time I put down the phone, it rings again, or I get another text message hearing different things. What I can confirm is there's going to be a party room meeting tomorrow afternoon to supposedly vote on a new leader. Now that's interesting because it's not a sitting week here at the moment, it's school holidays in New South Wales, and the House hasn't been sitting for the last 2 weeks, so you still have some members who are overseas, so it's going to be interesting to see how they're going to have their vote. I mentioned earlier that it was looking more like Gladys Berejiklian, who's the current Transport Minister, to become Premier. I'm now hearing that she might not have the numbers. Possibly Mike Baird does. Maybe Gladys Berejiklian would go in as Treasurer and then as Anthony Roberts, possibly as Deputy Leader. But Jeremy, when I finish this conversation, there's probably another text message that that's changed again. But I'm sure that in this house here, Parliament House, the lights are going to be on very late tonight.
Quentin, it's been an extraordinary day, one for the history books. Take us through the events that led up to today's dramatic resignation from Barry O'Farrell.
Barry O'Farrell, the Premier of New South Wales, was interposed as a witness after Nick DiGirolamo gave evidence about the bottle of wine, Jeremy, and he said famously now that he was certainly checked with his wife Rosemary, we didn't receive that bottle of wine. Even though there'd been phone records and receipts of courier services on the bottle of wine. The next day at 9:30, this morning at 9:30, Barry O'Farrell is advised that Nick DiGirolamo has brought in this note, this handwritten note. It's been faxed or emailed to Barry O'Farrell. He looked at it, said, that is my handwriting, it's over. I have inadvertently, he asserts, misled the Independent Commission Against Corruption, called a press conference and resigned. I spoke to him this afternoon trying to persuade him to come on and explain the circumstances to the people of New South Wales. He declined it and said he accepted what had happened. He was quite philosophical and accepted his fate. But there will be a great deal of deconstruction of all these events, including the ICAC putting him up when all the dots hadn't been discovered, all this information hadn't been discovered, and where he could have been confronted with this note and then may be able to say, yes, that's, I do acknowledge and I didn't declare. He may still be the Premier of New South Wales had the circumstances occurred. Also, this has been out since the 6th of March when the Telegraph, somebody tipped off the Telegraph that asked him about the bottle of wine.
So, Quentin, tell us this. In whose interests would it be to leak this originally?
I don't know. There'll be, as I said, a lot of deconstruction about this timeline to try to find out all the circumstances which led up to these momentous events. The ICA's decision in interposing him as a witness until all the facts were out. Whoever told the journalists that, hey, go and have a look at this bottle of wine on the March the 6th. His lawyers have been only on the case since the March. Barry O'Farrell's been in China with the Prime Minister and said, I've only just come back, and ICAC initially was asking me about a case of wine and then a couple of bottles of wine, and then only within the last day was it one bottle of wine. And his counsel said, go in and tell what you know. If you haven't got a recall, say you don't recall. And that's what's happened.
All right, Brigid, just very briefly, this isn't over for the Liberal Party. The ICAC is continuing to cast its net.
That's right, Operation Spicer, that begins at the end of April, and that's going to look at Australian Water Holdings, this same company we've been hearing about. It's alleged that it made some donations to Chris Harcher, who's on the Central Coast. He used to be the Resources Minister here, made Liberal Party donations in return for favours, and they made those donations through a slush fund set up by some of the staffers, so it's not over for the Liberal Party in New South Wales.
Right, Brigid, Glanville at State Parliament, and Quentin Dempster in the studio. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks.
And that's all for this special edition of ABC News. From all of us on the team, thanks for joining us. Good night.
Let's be very clear, this isn't about a bottle of wine. This is an insight into how the Liberal Party operates in government in New South Wales.
Barry is a man of honour. He is a man of integrity. He is a very decent man, and I think he's been a very capable Premier over the last 3 years.
I've accepted that I've had a massive memory fail. I still can't explain either the arrival of a gift that I have no recollection of. I will be resigning the position and enabling a new Liberal leader to be elected, someone who'll then become the Premier of New South Wales.